It's been a year since the release of Marvel's Spider-Man 2. Yeah, an entire year. Oh my god. A game that, at launch, I absolutely loved. I had huge expectations off the back of two really great Spider-Man games that, for the first time in a long time, encapsulated Spider-Man in video games in a great way. This time it was tackling not one, but two of the biggest arcs known in Spider-Man. Kraven's Last Hunt and the symbiote arc. For the most part, I definitely felt it lived up to them. It felt like a video game version of the 90s show. But on its 1 year anniversary, having waited till now to do my New Game Plus run, it was time to replay Spider-Man 2. Because since release, there's been a lot of conversation about DLC, cut or underbaked features, the rendition of the characters, lots to talk about. And I'm more than happy to discuss a lot of that. But I'm seeing takes online that are trying to gaslight me into thinking that Marvel's Spider-Man 2 was a bad game, and it got me thinking, did we play the same game? This video is going to be a lot about the story. I actually think the beauty of comic books and superheroes is that there's so many iterations, and every person has their own visualization of who a character is to them. Marvel's Spider-Man 2 tackled potentially the biggest of them all 19 inches of him. Venom and the symbiote arc. There's been a lot of conversation about Venom since launch, about whether the potential was fully realised and therefore did Marvel Spider-Man 2 reach the heights it should have. Honestly, is it my favourite portrayal of Venom? Far from it. Does the final third of the game feel rushed? Absolutely. Does it hit the same level of storytelling and emotion that the first game provided? I don't think so. But Marvel Spider-Man 2 is a true sequel, one that evolves on the first in almost every way and has some fantastic Spider-Man moments here. Even just trying to go back and playing the first after it, everything feels like it's on another level. I truly love this game. Its characterization of Kraven in what is probably one of the best interpretations of him in years. The way that the web swinging was evolved upon, the pacing of the combat, and the little down-to-earth moments that make Spider-Man who Spider-Man is and the moments that define that character. Those grounded side stories or the main moments that showcase why Spider-Man is loved as a hero in the way he is. So, let's talk about Spider-Man 2 1 year later. Before we begin, just know that this video is going to be full of spoilers about pretty much everything that happens in this game. So, if you haven't played yet, and you plan on doing so, get out of here now before I'm going to ruin it all for you. Alright, I want to start with the game's story, and in so, begin with Kraven. I think the original Spider-Man demonstrated the best villain in terms of emotion with Doc Ock in the first game because 9 times out of 10, the best Spider-Man stories are the one where Peter and Spider-Man's relationship are caught in the same web. But the way Insomniac did Kraven here, I think was genuinely world class. From the theme that John Pisano scored for him, every time he is on screen, you feel that presence. And it's accompanied by some truly fantastic lines too. I think part of what really establishes Kraven as this titan of a villain is watching him dispose of Scorpion pretty early on in the game, but then later on finding out he's killed Vulture, Electro, and Shocker too. At launch, I wish we'd seen that on screen, but at the same time, when you see the remnants of their cells and their equipment in game, it has a similar chilling effect. I think Kraven's arc is, alongside Miles, the best in the game. His desire for a worthy adversary on his final hunt is really, really good. And it's not just his effect in the main story, it's around it too. Whether that's provoking the symbiote, transforming the lizard, or trying to enrage Sandman, and what happens later with Chameleon. Despite how the game goes towards the end, I'd argue that Kraven has the greatest impact on the overall narrative. That scene in the bell tower is fantastic, and I think that's a really good moment that begins to set up exactly what he wants. I think what I really love is the way that Kraven is able to serve his own arc, but also he's the one that propels the symbiote arc and gets the gears in motion for that. How it's Kraven that stabs Pete that gets Pete the symbiote to begin with. How he agitates Pete in their various encounters. How he takes Miles as bait to come and get him. Kraven's desire for a showdown with the symbiote does wonders for really moving that symbiote arc along. That's a natural point, I guess, to talk about the symbiote then. Beginning with the scene where Pete first gets it. I've become a huge fan of games interpreting their big power moment, whether that's accepting the truth in Final Fantasy 16, the rage in God of War, or here, going into what I would class as ultimate symbiote mode. I think as a gameplay mechanic, it seems obvious, but I love the way that even with the symbiote on normal, you're just kind of hitting enemies, but when you go into that mode, that true power is unleashed, there's less restraint and more power behind your attacks. It's almost like a subtle bit of storytelling to showcase the symbiote taking control, because you're not pulling your punches anymore. So yeah, the first time you get the symbiote, I think is fantastic. Here's the thing, I actually think the first half of the symbiote arc is really well done and well told. Yuri Lowenthal, who obviously plays Peter Parker, said that he researched kind of that feeling of addiction and what that does to people in preparing for his role with the symbiote here, and I think that really shines through. I also loved how, as you progress through the story, the symbiote suit itself evolves to more tendrils and more alien looking and less of a Spider-Man suit. The way the symbiote starts to fracture relationships is good. How he downplays Miles, doesn't read MJ's article and then gets upset when she publishes it, and just craves more power. I think there's some terrific symbiote moments here. Subtle things like Pete saving a guy but then just flinging him off into the wayside. I'm the hero, not you. Blaming Miles for not capturing the lizard, but probably the best moment in the game is the scene with Mary Jane and the tunnel. I actually think the MJ missions in this game, and I wasn't a fan of them in the first one, but I think they're well done here, and the way they use MJ to showcase the power and the anger of the symbiote, but also how Pete isn't in control in this moment, I think is really great storytelling. When Pete's chasing you down in the tunnel, and it's revealed that Pete is still asleep, that's the true moment in the story, you know the symbiote's taking control. There's also a really harrowing moment on the way to fight Kraven and rescue Miles when you first hear the symbiote speak and it goes, "Kill Kraven." I mean, that whole sequence is just fantastic, man. Kraven using the box and saying,
"I'm assured that material is unbreakable. But I believe anything can be broken."
And it's that fight with Kraven, with Peter, that next hour of gameplay, hour and a half, is just sensational. It is Spider-Man at its best, and it's Insomniac at its best, and it is such a roller coaster. It's fantastic. I really enjoyed the fight with Kraven too, especially the second phase where he's kind of the hunter in his element here, using the cloaking tech, sniping. It's a really good boss fight, man. It just feels like two titans going at it, brute force, blow for blow. I also feel like the boss fights of this game are a particular highlight, compared to the first two games anyway, and this was definitely enhanced by the parries and the ability trees that you have at your disposal. Going back to that Kraven fight though, the moment where Peter is about to kill Kraven and Miles swoops in and then Peter's just so angry. I mean, we all thought it right in the lead up to release that they would fight, but I think this moment is brilliant. And you know what? Because of the way Pete has been towards MJ and Harry and Miles, as Miles, you don't feel bad for beating the shit out of him in this moment. But I do love that in this fight, you start to get little remnants left of Peter that throughout the phases he's realising he's not himself. And there's just some really raw lines here, like the line of Miles going,
"I can't let this go. I'm finally everything everyone needs me to be."
Yeah, you don't even answer my calls anymore, man.
Was so real. It's not like the most emotional, grounded line you'll ever hear, but it's so fitting of their fractured relationship and Pete's descent. And we all love a good Spider-Man moment, right? That moment where Pete starts to rip off the symbiote and you see the red and white spider underneath. That's a good Spider-Man moment, man. Ultimately though, I think this is Miles' game. Pete's line of Spider-Man didn't save me back there, Miles did. Again, a good Spider-Man moment, man. Obviously, here begins the story of Venom. And do you know what I really liked in this moment? I like that Harry doesn't smash the container of the symbiote open. It's his burning desire for the symbiote back that means the symbiote itself breaks out of the container. And man, when Venom first appears, what a juggernaut. The stature of him, the way he flings Spidey aside, and when that camera pans around to showcase that he is now playable, I mean the excitement that brings with it. We thought maybe we would get to play as him, but I don't really think that. It was just so good. This little act is just a pure roller coaster, and I think this mission is one of the best in the game, hands down. But I also think that this mission is also the best showcase of Venom in the game. How brutal his takedowns are on the guards, how he towers above all of him, the rage and the power scale of him. This is Venom at his best in the game. Obviously, it culminates in a cinematic battle with Kraven, which is a lot of fun, especially being bang slap in the middle of Times Square, but ultimately, it completes Kraven's arc whilst beginning Venom's. Kraven getting his final hunt, whereas Harry takes arguably his first victim. I liked how that happened, how it concluded Kraven's arc by completing this beast. However, the Venom arc itself, I don't know, man. I'm down for new interpretations of characters. Like, I think it's important and healthy to try and give us new interpretations of characters that we've known for a long time. And I think that the setup between Venom and Harry and how that connects Pete and Spider-Man is very good. But I just think this final third of the game is a bit rushed. But also, it's personal preference because it's just not what I think of when I think of Venom. And like I say, I'm willing to try new interpretations, but I don't think this interpretation worked. Venom to me is about a strong hatred of Spider-Man, a jealousy of Peter because he wants those Spider-Man powers back, or he just hates everything that Spider-Man and Peter has put them both through. And that's never really conveyed in this portrayal of Venom. I think the whole save the world theme is okay and a good through line throughout the entirety, but the constant desire of Venom to want Pete on his side, rather than any kind of hatred of him, just never really sold me on this Venom. And I just think that when New York gets covered in symbiote, it all just happens and ends so quickly that you never really feel much consequence or reaction, other than a small bit of a quest and the podcast. It's compared a lot, and probably rightly, to Web of Shadows, which, yeah, probably did the whole symbiote Venom stuff a bit better. Like the stuff with Scream and MJ was fantastic, having her true desires come out, how she really feels, and I think that's some really good voice work between Laura Bailey and Yuri. But it's so short-lived, and it needed a bit of time to build and breathe maybe. And that's just generally how I feel about this final third of the game. I think having the symbiote take over the city could have been good, but it all happened so fast, and then it's over so quickly that it never gets its moment to like really settle with you, or to have actual ramifications. Like for sure, we see MJ engulfed in the symbiote, but then when you compare that to what Kraven did in killing 4 of Spider-Man's biggest villains, Venom doesn't have that same presence or that same piercing effect other than the fact that he's just Harry. I've spoke so much about Peter and his arc, but I really do feel that the star of the show here is Miles. The anti-Venom scene is cool as fuck, but the moments of Martin Lee and Miles are terrific Spider-Man moments. And as Miles has him, you kind of think, oh shit. And then when he has defeated him, he sends him away to go and find Peter. Just bloody good stuff. But I think the best part of this, not him saving Peter, not him taking out Sandman, it's this scene with Lee.
Well, if this is my last chance to say anything to you, I won't forgive you. It's just not in me. But I can't carry this hate for you anymore, man. So let's set things right. You and me.
Like, that to me is some really good fucking Spider-Man. And even Peter says it where, like, he's never reformed a villain. And the hatred that Miles had for killing his father, and the fact that he doesn't forgive him, but he lets it go. I just think it's a brilliant, brilliant piece of storytelling and a brilliant Spider-Man moment. In a game where the two main antagonists have the desire to kill or to take over, he just stops wanting revenge and holding the hatred. A good message for what a lot of people I think should take away from this game. I love too how Lee's powers become infused with Miles and the gameplay effects and ramifications of that. And I think with Lee, some of the best moments are in the negative zone with him. Martin Lee disguising himself as Ganke or Miles' mom and dad. Really good moments there, showcasing Miles' resilience and willingness to never give up. And one aspect that I also loved was the callback to a trailer from Marvel's Spider-Man in 2018 of Peter getting knocked down by Scorpion and Rhino, etc, etc. And the same thing happening to Miles here as he enters Peter's domain. Obviously when Miles and Lee work together to save Pete, you see the guilt he feels over May. I think all of the performances here in Marvel Spider-Man 2 are really, really good. And I like what they did with Anti-Venom here, because when we get the symbiote powers, as the player, you kind of don't want to lose the symbiote because you don't want to lose them powers. So I think it was clever of Insomniac to kind of introduce Anti-Venom so that even when the game was over, you could still use those powers. I do hope that come Marvel Spider-Man 3, there is some kind of conclusion on the symbiote arc that Peter hasn't still got those powers come the next game. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see on that one. But I loved how it was used for gameplay here. Especially after we got Miles Morales back in 2020, we were all kind of asking, how can Pete be as fun as Miles was in that game? And the answer was, well, the symbiote. Something else that I really appreciated was that final mission. One of my biggest complaints of the Arkham games is how Batman-centric it is, despite the fact that all the Bat family are around. The final mission here incorporating playing as MJ, then transitioning to Pete, and then to Miles, I thought was good. The mission name being together kind of having that dual meaning of them being a team, but also what Harry says at the end in purging the Venom suit. I love fighting Venom as Peter in the high school too. I think part of what makes many boss fights grand and epic is the location that they're at. And then having them fight here as they go back and forth was terrific and also fitting. This boss fight was very good and John Pisano really cooked with the score for this game. Just brilliant stuff. Of course, we gotta mention the Venom wings, man. The first time I played, I gasped. Just so sick. It really was. And then after you finish the phase with Miles, I love them fighting in the air. And that bit where Miles and Peter are just wailing into him. Like Arkham beatdown mode. It's like, man, we're so lucky to get these games. We really are. I love that in the end, it was Harry that helped Pete purge the symbiote and in doing so saying together. Miles saving Harry isn't something I really expected, and I'm keen to see where they take that for what I'm sure will be a Green Goblin-centric final game. But more on that another time. Of course, that's the major points of the story that I've spoken about there. But in any good Spider-Man medium, it's also the smaller, low-key moments that matter just as much. Of course, for me the most memorable side mission will always be Howard and Seabird. Let me tell you, that mission had no right fucking me up in the way it did. It was so jolly, I guess, and feel good, and then, I mean, you definitely feel the impact more as Pete than Miles, but, man, swinging with them birds, just very, very emotional stuff. But there's a lot of other good Spider-Man moments here, man. Restoring Marco's sanity and giving a gift to his daughter, giving the blind grandma one of Kraven's dogs, and of course, the chat on the park bench and have you ever been in love, Spider-Man? It's these moments that make a great Spider-Man product, man. Making it meaningful and human. And that's why he's a fan favourite and everyone loves him. I've spoke a lot about the story here, but what about as a game in terms of its mechanics and how it feels to play the game? How's that feel a year later? I think it's still fucking sublime, man. This generation of consoles has been a little lacking, I'd argue, in defining next generation. I think Spider-Man is one of the few to actually do it. The enhanced reversal in terms of the swinging speed, the variety of tricks, air boost, the loop-de-loop, the slingshots, they really listened to what fans wanted. And of course, the web wings, which I do like, but I'm Spider-Man, man. I just want to swing. And when the swinging feels that good, it's all I want to do. I also loved how when you were doing random crimes, having Yuri or Miles show up, it just adds a little bit of a spark to this world and it makes it feel more defined and lived in from a superhero point of view. Would it be cool to see Daredevil show up one day, or Iron Man, or the Avengers? Of course, but I also think it doesn't really take anything away either. I also think in terms of side activities, it's way better than the first two. Maybe there's a little bit less, but I think it's more purposeful and meaningful to the impact it has emotionally or to the grand scheme of the plot. I still wish they incorporated some form of replayability in their challenges, whether that's web swinging races, combat trials, and having some kind of leaderboard system that I could go up against my friends with and try and beat their time or beat their score. And I think the amount of suits that there is to play around with, the abilities to mix and match with, I feel like there's a lot of untapped potential there, and I definitely feel that, look, it's a single player game, but I think it does lack a bit of replayability in the way that Arkham games had the challenge rooms, or, yeah, just, I know it's not live service, but when a game is this good, I would like to play it more. Of course, I love the setup of Carnage. I think Carnage is a fantastic villain. Chameleon, of course, and then finally the final chapter with what they're teasing with both Otto and Norman, which will probably become Goblin. From a combat point of view, I know a few people miss the gadget wheel, but I always thought that really impacted the whole pacing of the combat. Here, it's closer to the Arkham feeling, which I prefer, of keeping the combat moving at a good, frantic pace and having an ability and a gadget wheel, which I think was a step up alongside having a parry. Especially for the boss fights, because that way it made it feel more cinematic and a little bit less repetitive. Speaking of the boss fights as well, like on those harder difficulties, you've got to nail those dodges and those parries, because if you don't, you're going to get demolished, mate. I also think that Marvel Spider-Man 2 is a game of moments that really stand out. I mean, I've spoke so much about this game already, and yet there is some glaring omissions that I haven't even touched on yet. The opening with Sandman and Peter as a teacher was sublime. I mean, what a spectacle and a way to set up the game. The portal scene with Black Cat, that they showcase this wider Marvel universe, but also show restraint in not going too far with it. The chasing of the Lizard across New York and them going pound for pound at it. The showdown of Miles and Peter leading to that panning of the camera to then play as Venom. Watching New York become covered in symbiote for the first time. Pete getting the anti-Venom suit. Miles letting go of his hatred for Lee, and the colossal battle with Venom across New York. There are so many memorable moments in this game, both in the main story and in the side content. Going back to that first moment I mentioned with Sandman, I was really excited about the possibility of Pete being a teacher and what they set up from both the end of Marvel Spider-Man DLC, but also the comic tie-in that they did for Marvel Spider-Man 2. I thought that for this particular iteration of Peter, the idea of him being a teacher, especially at Miles' school, was a very exciting one. So to see them move away from that left me a little bit disappointed, but look, they're the ones telling the story. It depends on where they go from here and what they try and do with Peter going forward. As for DLC though, I think it's disappointing if we don't get any. I really do. Who knows, by the time this video is out, they might have announced some kind of 1 year anniversary DLC, or maybe something at the Game Awards in December. But also, they were hacked, man. And I think it's kind of understated what kind of impact that can have going forward. It just sucks. At the same time, I just want more things to do in all of these suits that they've gave us, man. More opportunities to work as a tag team. I just love being in Insomniac's Marvel's New York. And maybe a lot of the Spider-Man community won't agree with me on this one, but I think Insomniac are really unfairly treated when it comes to alternate suits in the game. I mean, there is so fucking many alternate suits to pick and choose from, and yet they'll still be slated for like 1 or 2 ones that are missing. Look, I understand that if a suit was in the first game and it's not here and you really liked it, that's disappointing. But it's not a simple job of just copy and pasting, and at the same time, that first game is always going to be there for you to go and play again. We've had some really good quality of life features since launch, and I would agree that it did take a bit too long for many things like New Game Plus, Tendril Colours, swapping abilities, time of day. But Insomniac didn't ask to get hacked. So, Marvel's Spider-Man 2, 1 year later then. It's still an absolute pleasure to play. It's not a game that beats the original in every metric. I don't think it hits the same storytelling highs or the same level of emotion. And I think that final third could and should have been better. I think it was a little underbaked at launch in terms of quality of life and obviously New Game Plus, and I think given time to flesh that symbiote act out a little further, we could have really dialed up how people felt about this game and about Harry and Venom. And yet despite all of that, I can't help but just love this game. That every month I'll just boot it up and go for a swing around New York City. It's that feeling of familiarity, almost like that feeling of coming home. I think the combat here is much improved, from the boss fights to the enemy types to the general power fantasy of being both Spider-Men. I think the arc of Miles is proper good Spider-Man storytelling, and I think it's the best interpretation of Kraven in ages. Pairing all that with a New York that feels alive but so incredibly distinct as Insomniac's Marvel universe, side activities that are diverse and leave a real impact. And at the heart of it all, two excellent renditions of who and what it is to be Spider-Man. Marvel's Spider-Man 2, 1 year later, is a worthy sequel and proves that they are indeed greater together. So, how are you feeling about Marvel Spider-Man 2 1 year later? Have you replayed it since launch? Are you still, like me, hoping and praying for some DLC? And if so, what DLC would you like to see? I'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy my video, dropping a like would be appreciated. And hey, if you are after superhero content when it comes to video games, consider subscribing. I do it a lot around here, whether it's Arkham, whether it's Spider-Man, Marvel, DC, whatever it may be. Know that I've got you covered, so consider subscribing. Otherwise, all my socials will be linked in the description down below. So if you love some bad comic book opinions, you can find it down there. Regardless, I hope you have a terrific day. Play games, get gains, and I'll catch you next one.